Hi, I'm Amanda Geppert. I use she, they pronouns. I'm a non-binary white person with short white hair. I am in my home office in Chicago, Illinois, in the United States, recording this in front of a beige wall. My co-author is Laura Forlano, and we are both from the IIT Institute of Design. And today I'm here to share the takeaways from our full paper called Design for Equivalence, Agonism for Collective Emancipation and Participatory Design. Laura and I would like to acknowledge that the IIT Institute of Design resides on the traditional territories of the Three Fire Peoples, the Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi, purchased after 2.5 years of open warfare, decades of violence encroachment, and the defeat of a pan-Indian movement to keep settlers out of the Great Lakes region at the Treaty of Chicago in 1821, and receiving their final payment before moving westward in 1835. The area was also a site of trade, gathering, and healing for more than a dozen other native tribes. The state of Illinois is currently home to more than 75,000 tribal members, and the Chicagoland area is currently home to one of the largest and most diverse urban native communities in the U.S. Illinois is also the territory of the Ho-Chunk, Miami, Anoka, Menominee, Sac, Fox, and their descendants. By making a land acknowledgement, we recognize that Indigenous peoples are the traditional stewards of the land that we now occupy, living here long before Chicago was a city and still thriving here today. As we work, live, and play on these territories, we must ask what we can do to right the historic wrongs of colonization and state violence and support Indigenous communities' struggles for self-determination and sovereignty. For more than a decade, Mouffian agonism has been adopted by PD scholars and practitioners interested in how design can address controversial issues in a counter-hegemonic manner. Broadly speaking, Mouffian agonism has been applied two ways in participatory design. First, Carl DeSalvo suggests that objects of design can constitute the site and the means of agonistic pluralism. As an example, he points to the Spatial Information Design Lab's $1 Million Blocks project, shown here on the left. This project used data visualization as an active contest, opening up a conflictual space to generate new themes and trajectories for actions to unsettle hegemonic responses to crime. Second, agonism has been used to guide the processes of design, as in the portfolio research conducted by Malmo Living Labs, who sought to infrastructure agonistic public spaces in order to democratize innovation. This approach was developed in response to the top-down format of traditional design projects, as well as their established shortcomings, including rigid specifications and a general inability to adapt to changing conditions. Instead, Malmo Living Lab sought to foster bottom-up, cross-sector, heterogeneous, open engagement with, quote, diverse perspectives and creative, respectful, and contested collaboration, end quote, in places like the Rosengard neighborhood, pictured here on the right. Our paper is primarily concerned with this application of agonism. Our paper is primarily a theoretical contribution that emerges from a critical analysis of Mouffe's interpretation of agonism. We argue that a key construct of Mouffe's theory, the chain of equivalence, has been absent PD formulations of agonism that seek to create counter-hegemonic and emancipatory responses to complex social problems. The paper has 4 sections. We describe the attributes of agonistic theories in contemporary political theory. Second, because accounts of Mouffian agonism in PD literature have not yet described its core theoretical constructs, we offer a nuanced elaboration of the theory based on a close reading of Mouffe's publications, secondary analysis by other scholars, as well as relevant publications with or by Ernesto Laclau. The elaboration is the foundation for the 3rd section, a critical analysis of the application of agonistic pluralism using a well-documented multi-year engagement led by the Malmo Living Labs. It explores the strengths and limitations of the application of agonism relative to processes, participants, and outcomes. And lastly, drawing on 15 years of design research in public health, adolescent sexual and reproductive health, and violence prevention with systematically excluded individuals. Design for Equivalence offers a set of provisional, pragmatic guiding principles for PD processes that challenge social and structural inequality by creating alternative formulations of the common good, strong enough to counter power. We will discuss the main theoretical points next, which we hope will spark your curiosity enough to read the full paper. According to Wenman, agonistic theories share three attributes. First, they address the politics of diversity and the range of actions and kinds of initiatives available to concretely situated subjects to create a common society through specific formulations of constitutive pluralism, which recognize plurality as under continual threat from demands for homogenization. Second, agonistic theories have a tragic worldview, recognizing conflict, suffering, and strife are endemic to social and political life, not merely obstacles on a path to reconciliation. Wenman suggests a Foucauldian reading of agonistic contest reveals the centrality of human agency to contemporary agonistic democracy. Foucault states, rather than speaking of an essential antagonism, it would be better to speak of an agonism, of a relationship which is at the same time mutual incitement and struggle, less of a face-to-face confrontation that paralyzes both sides than a permanent provocation. Wenman argues this characterization of agonism recognizes the human condition is not entirely bleak, because it acknowledges the relationality and the capacity of humans to challenge the forces that try to govern their lives and affect their behaviors. Lastly, contemporary agonists share the belief that alternative modes of disagreement are available as constructive forms of rivalry and contest for adversaries, but they differ about what those modes include. Mouffe suggests rationalist efforts to achieve consensus without exclusion signify the eradication of, quote, the political, that is, the eradication of the many forms of antagonism that are inherent to human social relations and determine our ontological condition. Mouffe warns that by negating antagonism, consensus making elevates the potential for antagonism, or as she says, the return of the political. This results in the constant possibility of physical violence, sometimes associated with the politics of fundamentalism, extreme forms of nationalism, ethnic conflict, and terrorism. Instead, she suggests a democratic project of radical pluralism that accepts the consequences of the irreducible plurality of values. In this formulation, no identity is more important than another. Rather, they are equivalent and therefore legitimate. Mouffian agonism seeks to establish more constructive modes of conflict that transform antagonism between enemies to conflictual consensus between adversaries, thus avoiding the return of the political. Mouffe suggests that adversaries or friendly enemies are thus because as friends they share a common symbolic space, but also enemies because they want to organize this common symbolic space in a different way than each other. Mouffe suggests that pluralism can only be adequately constituted when identities, moralities, and lifestyles are formed by the perception of, or in relation to, something other. This is called the constitutive outside. This theoretical formulation underpins the goal of Mouffian agonistic politics, which seeks to establish us-them relations in a manner compatible with pluralist democracy. Mouffe argues this framing creates new subject positions that allow for a common articulation of anti-sexism, anti-racism, and anti-capitalism. In turn, such positioning establishes democratic equivalences that aim to transform the identity of different groups so that the demands of each group can be articulated with those of the others according to the principle of democratic equivalence. The chain of equivalence is central to how Mouffian agonism is organized and enacted in the world. According to Laclau and Mouffe, existing differences in power mean that marginalized and disadvantaged groups pursuing a model of agonistic struggle will need to develop novel and extremely political strategies to unsettle the current hegemony. To create these strategies, chains of equivalence are required. These are movements comprised of allied groups seeking extensive transformation of existing power relations. Groups in the chain possess their own relation to the existing hegemony, with their experiences and interests being irreducible to those of the others. Organized this way, groups can act in concert around an agenda of equivalence because they understand themselves as equivalently disadvantaged by existing power relations, though not exactly in the same way. Adversaries in the struggle propose their own interpretation of the common good, attempting to implement a different form of hegemony. From a design perspective, this can be interpreted as offering different proposals of the future. Examples of agonistic struggle exist across a range of contexts and issues and vary in form. Mark Purcell suggests that the anti-globalization protests against the World Trade Organization represent one of the most discussed models. He describes how groups from Seattle to Doha to Geneva, among many others, distinct in their relation to the existing neoliberal hegemony, shared equivalent opposition to it, and as such comprised a movement. The groups focused on such things as anti-third world debt, the environment, human rights, labor, etc. And though their individual concerns may have appeared disparate, they were able to define themselves as equivalent and act together strategically in their opposition to the World Trade Organization. The collective identity of these forces was modified without each respective group having to adopt a uniform identity or concern, allowing them to accomplish more together than individually. Relative to agonistic PD processes, the Malmo Living Lab sought to infrastructure design things by being the matchmaker between less powerful and hegemonic actors. If a match worked, it would yield new models of collaborative services for Malmo. Over several years, the lab partnered with a range of actors, creating a unique narrative about agonism and PD. Within this narrative, the lab's work with the Hair Guards Women Association is notable for its length, 7 years, and because it regularly appeared in lab publications. For this reason, it was chosen for analysis. Comprised of 400 members of Iranian, Bosnian, and Afghani descent, the association was appreciated for their problem-solving skills, despite having limited Swedish language skills or higher education. The Living Labs team aimed to demonstrate that an immigrant NGO could be a socioeconomic resource for Swedish society. They sought to extend association members' existing skills by matching them with more powerful private and public actors who had complementary skills and resources. In the instance of one match, association members were introduced to local women entrepreneurs to develop a business plan to create a catering company that would provide authentic foods from the regions they left behind. This match was fraught with tension. The entrepreneurs moved at a fast pace, focused on achieving their objectives, with no time to build rapport and trust with association members. Association members were interested in learning, but did not anticipate the pace or the laser focus of the entrepreneurs. They were late to meetings, missed other meetings, and struggled to craft their business proposals due to competing responsibilities. When the association's office was robbed and set on fire, the third in a series of anti-immigrant hate crimes, they asked if they could pause their participation. The entrepreneurs seriously questioned the association's commitment to the business development process. And though they were interested in the business concepts developed by association members, they adamantly disagreed with the collective approach of the concepts, illustrating different organizing principles and values. By seeing each encounter as an agonistic space, the Living Lab situated agonism at the level of face-to-face confrontation. The discrete interactions between individuals with power and those without it subordinated the matters of concern of less powerful actors to those with more power. We argue this formulation fails to achieve the kind of radical pluralism Mouffe imagines. When contest is situated at the level of the individual, it is paralyzed because less powerful actors cannot formulate an agenda of equivalence. In our paper, we also explore a set of fundamental issues that are challenges for creating conditions to support agonistic PD processes, including funding mechanisms, an overemphasis on adversarialness at a cost to social innovation, and the politics of citizenship. The Malmo Living Lab's focus on matchmaking between adversaries instead of allies undermined its ability to realize collective and emancipatory potential of Mouffian agonism. Therefore, we propose an approach that prioritizes the matters of concern of systematically excluded groups and is concerned with establishing design-oriented chains of equivalence. In this approach, designed for equivalence, allies federate around matters of concern through agonistic long-form PD processes to scope, research, prototype, pilot, and/or implement an articulation of the common good that challenges dominant paradigms. Articulations of the common good resulting from this kind of PD process, whether they are prototypes, products, services, interventions, policies, institutions, or movements, are then what stand in contest to their hegemonic equivalents, not individuals. At the end of our paper, we outline 5 principles that broadly describe what it means to design for equivalence. These will likely raise more questions than answers until they are further interrogated through practice and refined. They include 1, center and continually prioritize systematically excluded individuals and groups. 2, align lived experiences, situated knowledges, and expertise in service to an agenda of equivalence. 3, be agnostic about design outcomes early in the design process. 4, engage members of the chain of equivalence in conducting design research. And 5, deliberately build the capabilities and capacities of systematically excluded individuals and groups. To learn more, please read our paper. It is available for free online. Thank you so much for being here and joining us. Please reach out with any questions, responses, provocations that you might have. Our email addresses are on this slide. Thank you.